Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the first segment of our program, and that is the panel. So I'm going to invite the senators and the members of parliament and the moderators to please take their seats on the panel table.
Thank you, Mazen. Our first topic of the symposium is education. So I shall ask each panellist for their views, and each panellist has 1.5 minutes. We'll start off with the views of Senator Fierravanti-Wells from the Liberal Party, please.
Well, thank you. On the education front, our policies include some key commitments. We'll be spending an additional $37 billion over the next 10 years, with increased average funding per student at 62%. The focus is on student needs and providing certainty to schools. We want better results in schools for students, teachers and parents, and we want to focus on the essentials of education. We continue to back choice in education so that parents can choose the school that best suits their needs, including religious and independent schools. We have committed to the National Schools Chaplaincy Program on a permanent basis. Our new Skilling Australians Fund will create more apprenticeships. We are committed to getting more young Australians into work. Over 100,000 young people aged 15 to 24 got a job in 2017-18, the largest number in a financial year on record. We are also improving university education by providing a record $17.7 billion to universities and working with them to ensure this leads to better outcomes for students.
Well, education is the key to addressing all of the challenges we face. There's nothing more than educating our young people. It's the key to addressing productivity, making sure that our economy works and we continue to be prosperous. It's the key to ensuring we reduce discrimination within our community, because discrimination is often rooted in ignorance. So education needs to be seen as an investment, not as a cost, and for too long we've regarded it as a cost. Under the coalition government, we've seen significant cuts to school funding. We've got universities in TAFE that have been privatised and deregulated, and we've started to look at education as though it's only of benefit to the individual rather than a public good. We all benefit when people receive a world-class education. We want to see a big increase in our education funding. We want to make sure that all schools meet the requirements that we've already set out, and in particular our public schools, which are not receiving the funding they deserve. We've committed an extra $20 billion in investment in public school funding over the next 10 years, capital grants. We're also talking about making universities and TAFE free for people, like they were in the 1970s. We can have free universities and TAFE again, because education is an investment in our people.
Thank you, Senators Fierravanti-Wells and Senator Di Natale. We'll now hear the views of Mr Tony Burke from the Labor Party.
This community has made an extraordinary investment in education, both in schools that are run by the community and in the involvement in government schools. We want to reverse the $14 billion cuts that have been made to our school education system. We want to uncap the university places. That will open up 200,000 places over the decade for students. We want to reverse the decline in TAFE, which includes for 100,000 students removing the fees on TAFE. And finally, for universal preschool access for 3 and 4-year-olds. We know that if you invest in education, you change lives.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm the first person in my family to finish Year 10. In the world that my mum and dad grew up in Western Sydney in the 1960s, working class kids just didn't finish high school and go on to university. My dad got an apprenticeship after finishing Year 9. My mum got sick, she got rheumatic fever and never went to high school at all. But I'm a working class boy from Cabramatta who got a chance to finish high school and go on to university and become a lawyer. And in part that's because of the big reforms that Bob Hawke and Paul Keating made in the 1980s that got the percentage of kids finishing high school up from about 35% to 75%. But it hasn't fixed everything, because if you look at our community, there's still a smaller proportion of people in Western Sydney that finish school than in the North Shore or the eastern suburbs. and fewer going on to TAFE and to university. And the policies Tony talked about are about fixing that, reversing the cuts that have been made to our schools, more investment in TAFE, uncapping university places, which mean, Tony, you said 200,000 extra people being able to go to uni over the decade. In electorates like ours, that's an extra 2,000 young adults who'll get to go to uni that can't now. And Tony also mentioned childcare. The other big announcement we made on the weekend was making childcare free for families that earn less than $68,000 a year. That is massive. That will create opportunities for kids to go to childcare and make it more affordable for families who just can't afford it now.
Thank you, Mr. Burke and Mr. Clare. Amar?
Thank you. Now we're going to start talking this second topic, which is about health, and this time I'm going to start with Jason.
Well, thank you very much. The Labor Party is the party of Medicare. It's one of the proudest achievements of the Labor Party that we created Medicare in the 1980s with Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, and at this election we're making the biggest improvements and expansion of Medicare in decades. Firstly, if we win the election, we're going to make dental care free for 3 million pensioners and seniors. There is so much evidence that a lot of Australians over the age of 65 don't go to the dentist because they can't afford it. We've got an existing program that operates for kids from 2 to 17, but not for elderly Australians. More than 187,000 seniors at the moment have gum disease, but don't go to the dentist to get it fixed. This change will help to tackle that big problem in our community. In addition to that, big changes in cancer. 1 in 2 Australians will get cancer in their lifetime. That means you or the person sitting either side of you. And what we're saying in this election is we think that we need to invest more and use Medicare to make sure that if you do get cancer, your Medicare card looks after you, not your credit card. And that all of the scans that you need, all of the specialist visits that are necessary get funded by Medicare. One last point, which is not about politics but is about our community, and that is that there's a lot of people in our local community who tend to wait until it's too late to seek treatment when they get cancer. It's a particular problem in our local community and one we need to tackle head on.
Jason's gone over time, so I'll cut it back so no one complains. Cancer will always make people sick, but it should never make people poor. And we all know people where, technically parts of the treatment are covered by Medicare, but all the way through they keep having to go for tests and diagnostics that are not. And the financial burden is something that can be relieved, and that's why we've decided that that would be our focus in the biggest reform of Medicare since it was started.
Right. Thank you, Senator Clare and Burke, and I'm going to hand over to Senator Di Natale.
Thank you. As somebody who was a doctor before I started politics, health is very important to me, and I consider health to be a fundamental human right. Everybody should be able to access healthcare. It doesn't matter where you live, you should be able to access decent healthcare. One of the big challenges we have in our health system are big out-of-pocket costs for people. We're pleased that Labor has announced some reforms for people with cancer, but there are other things that make you sick. Heart disease, diabetes, kidney failure. I could go on and on. We need to reduce out-of-pocket costs across the health system, and our plan does that. With regards to dental care, we're pleased that pensioners will now get access to dental care. We negotiated the reform around dental care with Labor in 2010, but we want to go further. Dental care should be free for the entire community, just like going to the GP. Going to the dentist should be like going to the GP, and you should be able to use your Medicare card for both of those things, not just for your GP. We've got to invest more in prevention to keep people well. We don't spend anywhere near enough on prevention, which is the most cost-effective part of the health system. At the moment, we've got health insurance, where people are paying more and more for less and less. That's money we want to invest into the health system to reduce those big out-of-pocket costs and provide healthcare for everyone.
Thank you. There are 4 pillars to our health system: Medicare, private health insurance, universal access to public hospitals, and the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. There has been record investment for public hospital services, meaning more hospital services, more doctors and more nurses. There has been record bulk billing, meaning more Australians are now seeing their doctor without having to pay. 9 out of 10 visits are now free. We have guaranteed the long-term future of Medicare, and we are increasing Medicare funding. We have increased the Medicare rebate for important diagnostic services, including ultrasound and X-ray imaging, to reduce costs to patients. A stronger economy has meant better access to life-changing medicines, and since 2013, we have listed more than 2,000 medicines worth around $10.6 billion on the PBS. We're strengthening primary care to support Australian doctors and specialists to deliver improved access and outcomes for patients, including dental and immunisation. We support the private health insurance rebate, and there are 13 million Australians who rely on private health insurance. We've invested in medical research, which we think is critical to providing new treatments and improving the quality of life, and we've established a medical research future fund, and of course we've also increased other areas such as spending in mental health.
All right, thank you for Senator Di Natale and Senator Ferranti-Wells, and I'm going to hand back to Zane.
Our third topic of the symposium is employment. So we'll start with the views of Senator Ferranti-Wells.
Thank you. A stronger economy is the key to creating more and better paying jobs. Our economy, GDP, is growing at 2.3%, and a stronger rate than the OECD average in all of the G7 countries except the United States. Our 2013 promise for 1 million new jobs to be created within 5 years was delivered ahead of schedule. As at February 2019, more than 1.2 million more Australians are in jobs since this government was elected. Nearly 60% of these have been full-time jobs. Over 400,000 more jobs were created in 2007 alone, the most jobs in any year on record. And over 100,000 of these were for 15 to 24-year-olds were created in the 12 months to June 2018. And this has been the strongest result in any financial year. The unemployment rate is now 5%, and we're working to build a stronger economy in various ways, and I just want to mention a couple of these. We're backing small business. We've provided tax relief for small businesses with annual turnover of up to $50 million, and that's 3.4 million businesses that employ over 7 million Australians. The 30,000 instant asset write-off is helping small businesses to invest in the cost of machinery and equipment. We're also undertaking record infrastructure investment to upgrade highways, roads, rail projects. We're fixing the budget and providing tax relief for Australians.
Well, employment in Australia is changing rapidly. Some people are working long hours, too many hours. Other people aren't working enough. You've got job insecurity, wages are flat, businesses are getting squeezed, particularly small businesses being squeezed by big businesses. And part of the problem is that you've got too much focus from both sides of politics, but particularly the Liberal Party, on looking after big business. Remember that these big businesses donate millions of dollars. They donate them to political parties because they want a return for them. And we've got to address the role and influence of political donations in our politics. We've got to make sure that we do much more around wages by legislating the minimum wage. We've got to have a plan to protect workers' rights, and we've got that, to support small business. But we also need a plan to create jobs. Now, if we are going to meet the challenge of addressing climate change, we do that by creating new jobs in renewable energy. And we've got a fully costed plan that would create 180,000 new jobs in renewable energy right across the country by transitioning away from coal into clean technologies. Jobs in caring and looking after people, in aged care services, jobs in childcare, jobs in the disability sector, actually investing in people. That's our plan. Looking after people, investing in people, creating jobs.
Thank you very much, Senator Fierravanti-Wells and Senator Di Natale. We'll hear from the views of Mr. Tony Burke.
People keep telling me everything's going up except their wages. That's bad for them, bad for meeting the household budget. And if you're running a small business, it also is why people keep saying that people at the moment aren't spending money. It's all part of the same problem. And every time I hear the government say, oh, but if big business does well, that money will all make its way through the economy. We've been watching company profits grow 5 times faster than wages. So we need a wages policy. We need to undo the cuts to penalty rates. We need to have a principle that the minimum wage is in fact a living wage. And we need to make sure with employment that we don't think somehow money will magically trickle down to wages. Unless we design the system to make sure that people are paid properly, we will continue to see a disproportionate amount of money going to the top end of town.
Here's an interesting fact. Half the jobs that have been created in Australia in the last 10 years have been within 2 kilometres of the CBD of Sydney and 2 kilometres of the CBD of Melbourne. Lots of jobs concentrated in the big 2 capital cities, but not so good once you get out of the capital city into the suburbs or into the regions. Unemployment in the communities that Tony and I are privileged to represent in Canterbury Bankstown are almost double the national average. The key to breaking that problem is education, the sorts of things we were talking about before, making sure more kids finish school, get onto TAFE, get an apprenticeship or go to university and get the skills needed to reduce unemployment, which is at sort of chronic levels in our community. I care about it deeply. It's what gives people a chance in life to get a job. But Tony's right, it's not just unemployment, which is higher in our area, which is a problem. It's people who do have a job whose wages are flat. One of the things we'll do if we win the election is reverse the cuts that have been made to penalty rates. When I didn't have so much grey hair, I washed dishes at Sizzler in Carramar, and it was penalty rates that helped get me through uni. You know, it paid for the petrol or the train ticket or everything else. And it's not just young university students who rely on penalty rates, it's mums and dads. It pays the rent, it pays for the petrol, it looks after the kids. Penalty rates have been cut for hundreds of thousands of people across the country, tens of thousands in this area. And if we win the next election within the first 100 days, we'll pass legislation to reverse those cuts.
Thank you, Mr. Burke and Mr. Clare.
Fourth topic for tonight is the social support. We're going to start with Senator Clay.
Let me focus in my contribution on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. This is another thing that the Labor Party is extremely proud of. I got a text message from a friend of mine a couple of years ago after the scheme was set up telling me the story of her dad, who through the National Disability Insurance Scheme was given extra funding with physiotherapy to help him to get out of his wheelchair and to go to the toilet. Something very basic, something that all of us take for granted. She said in this message that after all of the physiotherapy and hydrotherapy that he'd received, her dad had been able to get out of his wheelchair and use the bathroom and get back on the chair for the first time in 7 years. And it was a very, very proud moment, brought tears to the eyes of a lot of people in the family. It's a great story. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad stories as well. My office is full of people who come in telling me terrible stories about their children struggling with disabilities, having their funding cut. I had a bloke called Frank come into my office last week. His wife died of a brain tumour last year. He's got a boy with Angelman syndrome and 2 other boys who play rugby league. He can't take those boys to rugby league training because his little boy with Angelman syndrome's just had his funding cut through the National Disability Insurance Scheme by 30%. It's a great program. It's not being funded properly with enough people that are skilled up to make it effective for our local community.
I just want to deal with 2 issues here. First one, that many of you in the room I've worked with on issues of family violence, and this community has worked really hard on issues of family violence. We'll more than double the money that's available there. That goes to early intervention, to frontline services, to emergency accommodation and legal services. We still have a woman dying every week in Australia through family violence, and it needs that level of attention. There's another issue that's often been raised, and that's the government's broken promise on the family visa for parents, where people have had to choose which parent will join them, and at exorbitant fees. We'll take off the cap so you don't have to choose which parent. We'll allow them at the end of the visa to reapply on shore, and the fees, which are currently incredibly expensive, will reduce to 1/4 of what they are now.
All right. All right. Thank you, Senator Clay and Burke. I'm going to hand back to Senator Di Natale.
You know, one of the values that I think defines who we are as a community is how we look after each other when people need help, how we care for children, how we care for older people, how we care for people with disabilities, how we care for people who might have a mental health issue. That really defines who we are as a society. And our view is that a decent society looks after one another. And that's the reason we pay tax. The reason we actually contribute in taxes is so that we can look after people. If you can't find a job in Australia, you have to live on $40 a day. Just imagine paying the rent, putting food on the table, all of those bills, transport, on $40 a day. Newstart has not gone up for more than 20 years. The Greens are going to fix that. We're going to increase Newstart by $75 a week. We're going to make sure that people who need care get it. If you're in an aged care facility and you don't speak the language, you'll get interpreter services. You'll get people providing care in your language, culturally appropriate care. We're going to have universal childcare, 3 and 4-year-olds, making sure that young people get the care they need, fully funding the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It is shameful that the last budget was balanced on the back of savings from the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We need to invest in our people. Our people are our most precious asset. We have to do everything we can that we provide the support for them when they need it.
I think what's really important that we have seen is that with the stronger economy, we have more Australians finding jobs. More than 1.2 million Australians are in jobs since we came into government. As I've indicated, unemployment is now at 5%. There are almost 250,000 Australians who are no longer on income support. And the percentage of people of working age on welfare has fallen by over 14%. This is the lowest level of welfare dependency in over 30 years. The best form of welfare is a job, and Australians believe in having a fair go, but they also believe that we should have a strong welfare safety net, which has been part of our national ethos. And we also believe very much that welfare and the welfare system is there to be used for appropriate reasons. Now, welfare spending represents 1/3 of our budget, and that's more than health, education and defence combined. So welfare spending and welfare also comes with responsibilities. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to entrench welfare dependency. We believe in providing greater support, but also managing expectations for job seekers through a number of initiatives. We've reinvigorated work for the dole, we're tackling drug dependency, we're doing various other things. We are cracking down on welfare fraud, but most importantly, we believe that the welfare system needs to be properly funded.
All right. Thank you, Senators Di Natale and Senator Parenti-Wells. I'm going to hand back to Zane.
Our fifth topic of the symposium is climate change. So we'll start with the views of Senator Fierravanti-Wells.
Thank you. Under this government, we've seen an unprecedented wave of investment in renewable energy such as solar, wind and hydro. 1 in 5 Australian households now have solar rooftop panels. This is the highest per capita uptake in the world. Wind and solar generation in the national electricity market is projected to increase by 250% over the next 3 years. Over $25 billion of clean energy investment is already committed in the Australian energy sector from 2018-2020, with a record $13 billion invested in 2018. Now, to ensure that intermittent renewable energy sources can deliver reliable 24/7 power, we are also underwriting investment in new reliable power generation to improve competition and reduce wholesale power prices. And this includes investing in Snowy 2.0. Now, climate change, we know, is a global issue that does require a global solution, and we are committed to Australia playing its part in reducing emissions. And whilst Australia accounts for just 1.3% of global emissions, we have made responsible international commitments to reduce our emissions and have demonstrated a strong track record in meeting and beating our targets. We have overreached in our commitment on the Kyoto Protocol, and we will meet our Paris commitment target to reduce emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2030.
I've got two young boys, and the future for them terrifies me. I'm trained in science. As a doctor, we learn about science, and the science is very clear. More fires, more floods, the Great Barrier Reef, they might never be able to enjoy that. The collapse of the Murray-Darling Basin. If we don't look after the Earth, we have nothing. It is the Earth that sustains all of us. And it's going to be my children whose future will be vastly different to the present that we enjoy right now. It is incumbent on all of us to act, and act quickly. And I have to say that this government has no climate plan and no energy plan, despite the breakdown of our climate right there in front of us, happening. We have to move out of coal, and we have to create the 180,000 new jobs that come with renewable energy. This should be a good news story. My father was an electrician. If he was working today, a big part of his job would be putting solar panels on roofs. These are jobs for people, real jobs, long-term jobs. If we make that transition, it's actually a positive future, because we create jobs and investment. We export hydrogen to the world rather than coal. There are so many opportunities if we do this, but we have to act, and we have to act quickly. And I'm so afraid to say that neither party has a plan to tackle climate change, to phase out coal and to embrace renewable energy technology.
Thank you, Senators Fierravanti-Wells and Di Natale. I'll hand over now to Mr. Tony Burke.
How many times have we all thought one of our ambitions in this life is to make sure that we leave a better world for our children than what we found? There's one simple fact with climate change that needs to be understood, and it's a concept of 2 degrees. Because of the gases that are stored in the polar caps, once you get beyond 2 degrees of global warming, the whole thing builds on itself. You're past what they call the tipping point. The scientists say, in terms of what each country would have to do to avoid that 2 degree tipping point, Australia would have to have a 45% cut in emissions by 2030. The government look at that information and they have a target of 26%. We listen to the scientists and we say if it's 45, then 45 is our target. What that means in terms of respecting the science is it's not simply the big iconic issues that you'll see with the Murray-Darling or the Great Barrier Reef. Think of the number of days of extreme heat that we've had in the last year. Think how every year we are told it is the hottest summer on record. And think back to that principle of wanting to make sure we leave our children a better world than what we had. And that's why we need to act on climate change.
I think most of us have probably seen that movie Groundhog Day, where you wake up to the alarm clock and it's the same day with the same issues every day. And that's sort of what it feels like for me, being a Member of Parliament for the last 11 years, talking about this issue. For as long as I've been in Parliament, and I was elected when Kevin Rudd beat John Howard, and this was a big issue in that election, we've been talking about how do we tackle climate change. one thing, a lot of people watch Question Time and see politicians screaming at each other, and they say, why do we scream at each other so much? And I think this is one of those areas where people are just saying, why won't the politicians sit down and constructively work with each other? The party that Tony and I are proud to represent have tried to do that. Unfortunately, it's hard to do that when the Liberal Party is so divided on this issue itself. Malcolm Turnbull lost the leadership of the Liberal Party twice because people in his own party, well, there are people in his own party who don't think climate change is a man-made phenomenon. We need sensible heads to prevail and to work out a solution here which is going to sustain more than one government. Big policies that work for the betterment of the country have got to outlast individual governments and find a way to bipartisanship. That's why when Malcolm Turnbull put forward the NEG, we said, look, we don't think it's the best model, but we think it's workable and we'll try and work with that. That's why we're putting forward that as a model at this election. The Australian people are crying out for action on climate change, and we'll deliver it if we win the election.
Thank you, Mr. Burke and Mr. Clare. Ahmad?
Right, thank you, Zane. Our last topic is going to be one of the important topics for us as a community. It's about Islamophobia, and we're going to start this time with Senator Clare, but Islamophobia.
A friend of mine, Jihad Dib, the member for Lakemba, once told me that he could compartmentalise his life into two phases, life before September 11 and life after September 11, and how he felt as a proud Australian Muslim and the way in which people approached him. And I think in particular, you can identify another date, which is what's happened since 2014, the last 6 years, with what's happened in Syria, the rise of ISIS, and all of the challenges that have been brought home here for the Muslim community in Australia, and the political debate which we've experienced in Canberra. And I've got to say I'm proud to sit here, not stand today, sit next to Tony Burke, because there's been no stronger advocate for the Muslim community in the Parliament over the last 6 years, when Bronwyn Bishop tried to ban the burqa in the public gallery of the Parliament, or when Tony Abbott said that Muslim leaders need to condemn terrorism and mean it, or when Peter Dutton said it was a mistake that Australia brought in Lebanese Muslims in the 1970s and the 1980s, or when Fraser Anning delivered that final solution speech. It was Tony Burke, the man sitting next to me, that was the first to his feet in the Parliament to condemn those remarks. He did it within 5 minutes of that Fraser Anning speech. That's the sort of leadership we need here in our local community, and we're fortunate to have in Tony Burke.
Like you, I want it to stop. Like you, I am sick of your community and your faith being used as a political tactic. Being used as a political tactic. Be in no doubt, it is a political tactic that the government, in doing it, is not doing it the way that they have apologised for, given licence for these different issues with respect to Islamophobia. It's not with a view of them actually necessarily being Islamophobic. It's to give a nod and a wink to the people they're trading preferences with, the LNP's trading preferences with in One Nation and the other parties. That's what's going on. And if they win this election, they will have got away with it, and that form of politics will have been normalised. I will never experience the bigotry that people in this room experience from day to day. Not even for a moment. But my neighbours will, my friends will, and my sense of Australia is not that multicultural Australia is a minority group. It's the definition of who we are. We are not a team, we are a family. And we have to treat each other that way. And the people who want to play the politics of division, I want in 2.5 weeks for them to lose. And then I want to make sure that we don't play the same card back at them, that we simply have a government willing to lead and bring people together again, because we cannot keep going on the way we have the last few years.
Right, thank you, Senator Clay and Senator Burke. I'm just going to hand to...
They'll be very upset if you call them senators.
Well, sorry. Mr. Clay and Mr. Burke, I'm going to hand over to Senator Di Natale. My apology. All right.
Lower house
You can call
members
me
get
Senator.
very upset.
Look,
My apology.
in the wake of the horrific attacks in Christchurch, in Sri Lanka, the anti-Semitism that's going on around the world as well, we've all expressed our thoughts and sympathies, but it's not enough. We've got to actually name what's going on, and the truth is that our leaders, both within the parliament, and we're not just talking about fringe parties, we're talking about people at the heart of this government, people within the media, people like Andrew Bolt and other parts of the News Corp stable, they nurture this hate. They feed it. They are the place that actually gives licence to these voices of hate, and we need to stand up to them. I mean, when we talk about Lebanese Muslims being a mistake, or you can't go out to a restaurant in Melbourne apparently because you'll be bashed up by Africans, according to Peter Dutton, when you have those voices in the public debate, they need to be called out, they need to be held to account. The truth is that thoughts and prayers aren't enough. We have to stand up to these voices publicly. We need to actually have hate speech laws that prevent this, that prevent the vilification of people on the basis of their religion or ethnicity. We need laws to protect people against the voices of hate in our community. We need laws that hold the media to account, to ensure that they can't continue to blame people for the actions of others. We need a code of conduct in our parliament, and the Greens have been pushing for that, so that the activities, the contributions that are so common within our parliament are no longer allowed. We have to come together as a community. We have to recognise that the greatest strength that we have in Australia is our diversity, the fact that we are a land of migrants, of people from many different faiths and ethnicities, and it makes us who we are. It's why we are such a wonderful country, and we have to keep working hard to keep it that way.
Faith is very important here in Australia, and most of the world's religions are practiced here. But we want all Australians of all faith to be free to express their beliefs and practice their religion without intimidation and interference. And that's why I've been a very, very strong advocate for freedom of religion in Australia. And that freedom is for all faiths. And this includes advocating the rights of Australians of Muslim faith against discrimination and prejudice. Now, we are one of the most culturally diverse yet socially cohesive nations on earth, and your efforts in this room have helped and contributed in a significant way in our social cohesion. And we can discuss aspirations and policies to achieve these aspirations, but unless you are free to be able to practice your religious beliefs free of prejudice and discrimination, your positive experiences of daily life will be compromised. And that's why I have pushed, and I call on those at this table and the political parties that they represent. Religious freedom needs to be balanced against other issues. It's no point going into the parliament and advocating for the rights of one particular part of our society over the other parts of society. Let's be frank about this. We've just spent the last year fighting over the bill that was brought into parliament by Senator Wong that sought to go into every mosque, every institution, every church to deny people the opportunity to practice their beliefs and to practice their faith, because it was discriminatory. So let's be clear about this, and we have to be frank with each other about this. So I strongly believe that unless we have legislation in this country that protects religious belief and makes it and imposes sanctions for breach of that, then we will continue to have this discussion. So it's appropriate that we show condolences after what happened and has happened around the world, but let's turn that into a practical action. And those who are opposing the enactment of standalone freedom of religion legislation need to seriously consider their position and the hypocritical position that they have taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator De Natale and Senator Ferranti-Wells. I'm going